The massive doors of the transport ship opened with a loud hiss, and Captain Lee Daeho stepped out onto the metal floor of Station Kepler. His boots made sharp clicking sounds as he walked forward, carrying his single black bag. The station was bigger than anything he had ever seen, stretching out in all directions like a small city floating in the darkness of space around him. Dozens of strange alien creatures moved about, talking in languages that sounded like music, or growling, or clicking. Sounds that hurt his ears. The Altarians were tall and thin with skin that looked like blue glass that sparkled when the lights hit it. They moved in groups of 3, always staying close together and whispering to each other in voices that sounded like wind chimes. The Gorvik warriors were completely different. They stood almost 3 meters tall, with thick gray skin and 4 massive arms that could probably crush a human without even trying. Their faces looked like angry bears, but with too many teeth and small red eyes that seemed to burn like fire. They stomped around the station, making the floor shake with each step, and other aliens quickly moved out of their way. Daeho had studied all the alien species for years, but seeing them in person was still shocking. A group of Zephyrians floated past him without touching the ground. Their bodies were thin and graceful, with long silver hair that moved like it was underwater, and for arms that seemed to dance in the air as they talked. Each one had large black eyes that took up half their face, and when they looked at him, he felt like they could see right through him. Near the main information desk, a family of Malaxians sat together looking nervous. They were small and round, with soft purple fur and big ears that twitched when they heard loud sounds. The children stayed close to their parents and pointed at all the different aliens with wide, curious eyes. One of the little ones saw Daeho and waved at him with a tiny purple hand, but what made Daeho feel most alone was not how different all these aliens looked, it was how many of them there were. Every species had sent multiple pilots to take the Federation flight test. The Altarians had brought 12 candidates. The Gorviks had sent 8 of their best warriors. Even the small Malaxians had 5 pilots ready to try. Humans had sent 1. Captain Lee Daeho walked through the crowded station, following the signs that pointed toward the pilot registration area. Everywhere he looked, he saw groups of aliens helping each other prepare for the test. The Altarians were sharing data on their crystal tablets, working together to solve practice problems. The Gorviks were doing strength exercises and roaring encouragement to each other. The Zephyrians floated in circles, practicing their flight formations. Daeho was completely alone. When he reached the registration desk, a tall robot with glowing blue eyes scanned his identification card. The robot spoke in a voice that sounded like it was coming from inside a metal box. Pilot Lee Daeho from planet Earth species human, you are registered for the Federation flight test tomorrow at 0800 hours. You have been assigned sleeping quarters in Section C, Level 7, Room 439. Please note that as per Federation Regulation 847B, humans are allowed only 1 attempt at this test. The robot handed him a small device that would help him find his way around the station. As he took it, Daeho noticed that several alien pilots nearby had stopped talking and were staring at him. One of them, a young Altarian female with particularly bright blue skin, stepped forward. "Excuse me," she said, in perfect English, her voice sounding like crystal bells. "Are you really the only human pilot here?" "Yes," Daeho replied simply. The Altarian looked confused, but also a little sad. "We heard about your species rule, but we thought it was just a story. Why do humans only get 1 chance when everyone else gets 3 attempts?" Had heard this question many times before. The answer was always the same, but it never got easier to say. The Federation Council decided that humans lack the natural abilities needed for advanced spaceflight. They believe that giving us multiple chances would be a waste of resources. "That seems unfair," said another voice. A Zephyrian female had floated over to join the conversation. Her 4 arms moved gracefully as she spoke, and her large black eyes showed genuine concern. "My name is Yulra. I have been studying human history for my cultural research project. Humans have achieved remarkable things on their planet. Why would the Federation think you cannot learn to fly?" Daeho appreciated her kindness, but he had learned not to get his hopes up about changing alien minds. The previous test results speak for themselves. Every human pilot who has attempted this test has failed. Captain Martinez crashed in the asteroid field 5 years ago. Commander Okafor froze up during the emergency simulation before her. Lieutenant Park could not handle the G-forces in the combat maneuvers. The pattern is clear, but that does not mean you will fail," said Yulra. Each pilot is different, each attempt is a new chance. Maybe Deho said, but he did not really believe that the small crowd of aliens around him began to break up as they realized this conversation was making the human uncomfortable, but Deho could still hear them whispering as they walked away. Poor human, he has no backup plan I. Heard their reflexes are too slow for real combat. Flying why? Do they keep trying if they know they will fail there? Words stung, but Deho had heard worse. He picked up his bag and followed the device directions toward his sleeping quarters, the station. Corridors were wide and bright, with windows that showed the stars outside. Sometimes he would stop and look out at the darkness, wondering if he would ever see those stars from the pilot's seat of a Federation ship. His room was small, but clean, with a bed, a desk, and a small window that looked out at the other side of the station. He put his bag on the bed and pulled out the only personal item. He had brought with him a photograph of his daughter Kim Yujin, smiling at her 7th birthday party. She had died 3 years ago in a transport accident on Earth. The old human spacecraft had a mechanical failure and crashed into the ocean, killing everyone on board, including Yujin, who was traveling with her school class to visit the Space Museum. The investigation showed that the accident could have been prevented if Earth had access to Federation safety technology. That was when Deho decided to become a pilot. He had been working as an engineer, building bridges and buildings, but after losing Yujin, he knew he had to do something bigger, something that would make her proud. He quit his job and spent every day for the next 3 years training to fly. Training was harder than anything he had ever done. Human flight schools were basic compared to what other species had. Deho had to learn everything from old books and simple simulators that were decades behind. Federation technology. He studied alien flight patterns by watching old videos. He practiced emergency procedures. Alone in empty hangars, he pushed his body to its limits, trying to build the reflexes and strength that other species had. Naturally, but even with all his preparation, Deho knew the odds were against him. The Federation flight test was designed for species with abilities that humans simply did not have. Some aliens could see in multiple dimensions. Others could process information at incredible speeds. Some could withstand forces that would kill a human instantly as night fell on the station. Deho lay on his bed holding Yujin's photograph and looking out at the stars. Tomorrow he would either make history as the first human to pass the Federation flight test, or he would become another failure in the long list of human attempts. Either the way, he would give everything he had because, unlike the other pilots, who had backup plans and second chances, Deho knew this was his only shot at keeping the promise he made to his daughter, the promise that humanity would someday travel among the stars, the promise that her death would not be meaningless, the promise that he would not give up, no matter how impossible it seemed. The morning alarm on Station Kepler sounded like a gentle musical note that grew louder until everyone was awake. Deho had barely slept, but he forced himself to get up and put on his flight suit. It was made with Federation technology that could protect a pilot from forces that would normally kill them. Holographic display of the test course. Hundreds of seats were arranged in sections based on species, with the human section containing exactly one chair. Deho sat down and looked around at the other pilots. The Altarians sat perfectly straight in their seats, sharing data on their crystal tablets and speaking in quiet, harmonious voices. Slightly above their seats, never quite touching down, while their silver hair moved in impossible patterns near the front of the room. A massive screen showed the pictures and names of all the test pilots. When it reached the human section, there was only one image, Captain Lee Deho from Earth. A few aliens in the room made clicking sounds that Deho had learned meant they were laughing. Scaly skin and large golden eyes that seemed to see everything at once. His long tail swept behind him as he walked, and when he spoke, his voice carried easily through the entire hall without any amplification. Welcome pilots to the Federation flight test, he began. This test has been given for over 300 years and determines which species are ready to join the galactic community. The course you will face today will test not just your flying skills, but your judgment, your courage, and your ability to work with others. Vextal began calling out each species and their pilots. When he reached the Altarians, he announced their 12 candidates with respect in his voice. By the warriors roaring their approval, the Malaxians had 5 pilots, and even though they were small and quiet, the administrator spoke their names with dignity. Then Vextal paused, and his golden eyes found Deho in the mostly empty human section and Representing the Terran Coalition, we have Captain Lee Day-Hoth. Administrator stopped talking, and the silence stretched on for several seconds, then his mouth curved into what might have been a smile, if reptiles could smile as per Federation regulation. 847 be established after extensive review of human capabilities. This species will receive one attempt only. The reaction was immediate. Dozens of alien voices began talking at once. Some made the clicking sounds of laughter, others made musical trills. That sounded like mockery. A group of young Nexari pilots, who had 4 eyes each and could move faster than humans could see, began pointing at a voice like thunder. What is the point of this, Ethaman? The usually polite Altarians began whispering among themselves in their crystal chime language. Zephyrian female floated over to where Deho was sitting. It was Yulra, the same one who had been kind to him the day before, but now her 4 arms were moving in agitated patterns, and her large black eyes showed something that looked like embarrassment. Captain Lee, she said quietly, so others could not hear. I have been reading more about human test attempts last night. The records show that your species has never come close to passing any section of the test, who completed only 18% of the course before his ship was destroyed. Ho nodded. I know the statistics then. Results are always the same, because we have to keep trying. Deho said simply, but that makes no sense, said a new voice. A young Nexori pilot had approached them, moving so fast that Deho barely saw him coming until he was standing right there. The Nexari had silver skin and 4 bright blue eyes that never seemed to blink. My name is Kekstar, and even though he knew he probably did not want to hear the answer, Kekstar held up one finger which had too many joints, slow reflexes. Your nervous system processes information at roughly 1/10 the speed of most space-capable species. He held up a second finger. Poor spatial awareness. Humans evolved on a planetary surface and cannot instinctively navigate in 3-dimensional space, freeze completely, or make irrational decisions that lead to mission failure. The young Nexari was not trying to be cruel. He was simply stating facts the way a teacher might explain a math problem. But his words hit Deho like physical blows, because they were all true humans, were slower, weaker, and less adapted for spaceflight than every other species in the Federation. Ears spoke up in a voice so quiet everyone had to lean in to hear. I do not mean to be rude, but I must ask why the Federation allows humans to attempt the test at all. If failure is inevitable, Administrator Vextel had been watching the gathering crowd, and now he approached them with his long strides and sweeping tail. The golden eyes fixed on Deho with what looked like scientific curiosity that extensively. When humans first requested test privileges, some members argued that allowing continued. Why do you allow it? Asked Euler Vextel. Golden eyes seemed to glow brighter. Planetary evolution. They also serve as educational examples for other species about the importance of natural selection in developing. Help us improve our testing procedures. Each crash, each mistake, each moment of panic shows us new ways that the test can challenge pilots. We have made the course more difficult based on human errors, and this has improved the quality of pilots. From other specialists, Ho felt his hands clench into fists, but kept his voice calm. So humans are here to fail to make the test harder for everyone else. Essence, yes, Vextol said, without any shame, though if by some impossible chance a human actually passed the test, it would certainly make for an interesting case study. The crowd of aliens around them had grown larger, and Deho could hear them talking about him as if he was not there. Look how small he is compared to the Gorvexi herd human. Ships can barely reach half-light speed. Their training facilities are centuries behind ours. Why does he even bother? Deho stood up from his chair, and the talking stopped. The aliens looked down at him, waiting to see what the little human would do. Some of them seemed curious, others looked like they felt sorry for him, a few appeared to be recording the moment for later entertainment. Know what you all think about humans, Deho said in a voice that carried clearly through the suddenly quiet room. You think we are weak, slow, and stupid. You think we have no business trying to join the Federation. Several aliens leaned forward to see what he was holding. This is my daughter, Kim Yujin. She died because we are stuck on one planet while the rest of the galaxy travels among the stars. She died because pilots like me have not been good enough to earn humanity a place in the Federation. Deho, everything humans probably are too slow, too weak, too limited to pass your test, but I am going to try anyway, not because I think I will succeed, but because every human who has ever looked up at the stars deserves to have someone fight for their dreams." The silence in the room was complete. Even the background hum of the station seemed to have stopped. Then Administrator Vextel spoke in a voice that was different from before, less mocking and more thoughtful. "Interesting," he said. "Very interesting." Indeed, the briefing continued, but Deho barely heard the rest of it. The cockpit was barely big enough for a human, but the controls were more advanced than anything he had ever seen. Each button and switch glowed with soft light, and when he touched them, they responded instantly to his thoughts. As he strapped himself into the pilot seat, Deho could hear the communications from other pilots who had already started there. "English Gorvik pilot Thrackmore has entered the debris field. His approach is steady and powerful," announced the control Turletarian contestant, Zil. "Vera is calculating optimal trajectory through the solar wind corridor. Her mathematics are flawless." Meloxian pilot Dirfen is showing excellent defensive maneuvers in the combat simulation. One by one, the alien pilots completed their runs or failed and had to return to the station. The Nexari pilot Kekstar finished the course in 21 minutes, which was considered excellent for his species. Even some of the Zephyrians who were naturally gifted flyers. The first section was a field of spinning metal debris that moved in patterns too complex for any normal mind to predict. Ships that entered had to weave between chunks of twisted metal, some as big as buildings. While the entire field rotated and shifted every few seconds, the second section was called the Solar Wind Corridor, where pilots had to fly through streams of charged particles that could fry a ship's electronics if they got too close. The particles moved like rivers of fire, and the safe paths between them changed constantly based on solar activity. Section 3 was the gravity wells, where massive, invisible forces could crush a ship or fling it millions of kilometers off course. Pilots had to navigate by reading instrument displays that showed. Fourth section was something called the Empathy Maze, where pilots had to rescue simulated alien civilians trapped in a disaster zone. Each type of alien showed distress in different ways, and pilots had to recognize the emotional signals to know who needed help first. The final section was a moral test, where pilots faced an impossible choice: save themselves or risk everything to help others. Most species had their own way of handling this challenge based on their cultural values. Now it was Deho turned to face what had destroyed every other human pilot who had tried his ship launched from station. Kepler, with a smooth acceleration that pressed him back into his seat. The first section of the test course behind him, the massive station, grew smaller until it looked like just another star in the darkness. The debris field appeared on his sensors as a wall of spinning metal that stretched in all directions. The chunks of twisted wreckage moved in patterns that hurt to look at directly. Previous human pilots had tried to calculate safe routes through the field using their ship computers, but the patterns changed too fast for any calculation to work. Deho did something different. He turned off his navigation computer and closed his eyes. The other pilots, watching from the station, began talking excitedly over the communication channels. "What is the human doing?" asked Sonhe. "Has shut down his guidance systems," said another voice. "This makes no sense." Administrator Vex's tall golden eyes were fixed on the displays showing. "Deho ship, you are correct. It makes no sense at all, but look at his flight path. Instead of trying to calculate a safe route, Deho let his instincts guide him. His ship began to dance between the spinning debris like it was performing a ballet. The metal chunks whistled past his cockpit so close he could see scratches on their surfaces. The human ship moved through the debris field with a grace that none of them had ever seen. It was not the precise approach of a Gorvik. It was something completely new. "How is he doing that?" whispered Yalra, the Zephyrian female. Her forearms moved in agitated patterns as she watched. "He is not calculating the paths," said Kekstar, the young Nexari. His four blue eyes were wide with confusion. "He appears to be guessing, but his guesses are perfect." Deho opened his eyes as his ship cleared the debris field and saw that his timer showed 3 minutes and 40 seconds, the previous best time for this section. Corridor was already visible ahead. Streams of glowing particles that moved like rivers of liquid fire. The safe paths between them were narrow and constantly shifting. Most pilots spent several minutes studying the patterns before attempting to enter. Deho flew straight into the corridor without slowing down. The charged particles screamed past his ship, creating light shows that were beautiful and deadly at the same time. His shields began to glow as they deflected the energy streams, but instead of trying to avoid the particles completely, his ship to catch the edge of it, using the electromagnetic field to boost his speed when another stream tried to push him off course. He rolled his ship and let the force spin him into a better position. It was like surfing on waves of energy, and the human was not just surviving the solar wind corridor, he was playing with it, using the deadly energy streams as tools to go faster and said Administrator Vextal, but his golden eyes showed something that might have been excitement. The human is treating the solar winds like atmospheric currents. This should not work in space, but it was working. Deho cleared the second section in 4 minutes and 18 seconds when the average time was over 15 minutes. His total time so far was 7 minutes and 58 seconds. The gravity wells section appeared ahead, and this was where most pilots failed completely. The invisible gravitational forces could not be seen, only detected by instruments that showed them as colored patterns on a screen. Pilots had to fly by reading these displays while moving at incredible speeds through a three-dimensional maze of crushing force. Species approached this section carefully studying the gravity map displays and planning their routes step by step. The Altarians were particularly good at this, began flying through the gravity wells using only the way his ship felt when the forces pushed and pulled on it. When a gravity well tried to drag him toward, he found the balance points between them and rode those like a tightrope walker on the station. Even Administrator Vex Tal was standing now, his long tail lashing behind him in agitation. "This is not possible," he said. "The human cannot be navigating the gravity maze without instruments." But Deho was doing exactly that. His ship spiraled through the invisible maze of forces like it was dancing to music only he could hear. When he emerged on the other side, his timer showed 10 minutes and 31 seconds. He had just broken the all-time speed record for the first 3 sections of the Testa communication. Channels erupted with alien voices all talking at once. How is the human moving so fast? His techniques make no sense, but they work perfectly. Look at his flight patterns. He is not following any known procedures. Administrator Vextal raised one scaled. Lee Deho, this is Control Tower. Your performance so far has been unprecedented. How are you accomplishing these? Maneuver Deho voice came back. Calm and steady. I am not trying to fly like other species. Administrator, I am flying like a human. What does that mean? It means I am making it up as I go along? There was silence on all channels as the aliens tried to understand what the human meant. Then Deho's ship disappeared into the 4th section of the test course, and everyone realized that the most difficult parts were still ahead. The empathy maze was where many pilots failed, not because they could not fly, but because they could not understand the emotions of alien species different from their own. And Deho was about to attempt it alone, with no backup and no second chances. The empathy maze stretched out before Deho, like a 3-dimensional puzzle made of light and shadow. Holographic projections showed dozens of different alien civilians trapped in what appeared to be the wreckage of a space station. Each group of aliens was in distress, but they showed their emotions in completely different ways. The Altarians trapped near the center of the maze glowed brighter when they were afraid, their crystalline skin pulsing with blue light. The Gorviks roared and beat their forearms against the walls when they felt panic. The Malaxians huddled together in small purple bundles and made high-pitched whistling sounds. When they were scared, most pilots could only read the emotional signals of their own species. This meant they had to guess about the others and often chose wrong. The Nexari pilots typically rescued their own kind first, then tried to figure out the rest. The Altarians used mathematical probability to decide who was in the most danger. But Deho was human, and humans had spent thousands of years learning to understand the emotions of different groups. As his ship entered the maze, Deho began to see patterns that the other species missed. The way the crystalline refugees moved in slow circles meant they were not just afraid, but confused and needed clear directions. The angry roaring of the warrior caste prisoners was not just rage, but frustration, because they could not break free on their own. The soft whistling of the merchant families was not fear, but grief, because they thought their children were lost. One by one, Deho ship moved through the maze, rescuing each group in the exact order they needed help. The crystalline refugees first, because their confusion was making them panic. The warrior prisoners second, because their frustration was turning into despair. the merchant families third because once they knew their children were safe, they could help rescue others. But there was one group that no other pilot had ever successfully rescued: the silicate beings made of living rock who communicated through vibrations too low for most species to detect. They showed distress by changing color in patterns that looked random, but actually followed emotionally rhythms. Deho had studied human music and dance for relaxation during his training. Now he realized that the color changes of the silicate beings followed the same kind of rhythms as Earth songs. They were not random at all, they were singing their fear and colors. His ship moved to the silicate group, and he began to rescue them by matching his movements to their color song, flying in rhythm with their emotional patterns until they understood he was there to help on Station Kepler, the alien. Pilots watched in stunned silence. Impossible, whispered Yule, Ra, her forearms trembling. How did he know how to communicate with the silicates even? We cannot interpret their emotional patterns, said Kekstar, the young Nexari. His 4 blue eyes were wide with disbelief. Administrator Vextau golden eyes were fixed on the displays, showing Deho progress through the maze. In 300 years of testing, no pilot has ever achieved perfect rescue scores in the empathy maze the human is reading. Emotional signals from species he has never even met before. The timer showed that Deho had completed the 4th section in 6 minutes and 27 seconds. The previous record was held by a Zephyrian pilot at 14 minutes and 8 seconds. His total time was now 17 minutes and 18 seconds. He was not just breaking records, he was shattering them. But the final section of the test was still ahead, and this was where the real challenge lay. The moral choice section was designed to test a pilot judgment and character, not just their flying skills. As Deho ship approached the final area, his sensors detected what appeared to be a damaged enemy vessel. The ship was clearly marked with the symbols of the Vex Empire, a hostile alien nation that had been at war with the Federation for decades. The enemy ship was leaking atmosphere and sending distress signals. The test scenario was simple. Deho could fly past the enemy ship and complete the course with a perfect time, making himself the first human to pass the Federation flight test. Or he could stop to rescue his enemies, knowing that helping them would ruin his time and possibly cost him his only chance at success. Every species that had faced this choice had handled it according to their cultural values. The Gorviks believed that honor required helping even enemies. The Altarians calculated that showing mercy served the greater good. The Nexori decided that demonstrating strength meant protecting the weak. But as Deho approached the damaged enemy ship, he realized something that no other pilot had ever noticed: the distress signals were wrong. The enemy ship was sending out standard Federation emergency codes, not Vex Empire signals. The damage patterns on the hull looked like they had been caused by Federation weapons, not enemy fire. The life signs inside the ship showed a mix of species that included Federation civilians. This was not an enemy vessel at all. It was a Federation ship that had been disguised to look like an enemy. This was not a test of mercy, it was a test of observation and judgment. Most pilots had been so focused on the moral choice that they never stopped to examine whether the choice was real. Deho activated his communication system and sent a message to the damaged ship. This is Captain Lee Deho of the Federation flight test. I can see that you are actually a Federation vessel in disguise. Please confirm your true identity so I can provide appropriate assistance. The response came back immediately, in perfect Federation standard. Thank you, Captain Lee. We are indeed a disguised Federation vessel conducting a training exercise. We have been waiting for someone to notice the inconsistencies in our false enemy signals. Instead of choosing between selfishness and mercy, Deho had found a third option by questioning the assumptions built into the test itself. K quickly moved his ship into position and used his tractor beam to stabilize the damaged vessel. Then he did something that should have been impossible. He used the combined mass of both ships to perform a gravitational slingshot maneuver around a nearby asteroid. The physics should not have worked, but somehow Deho made it work. The 2 ships whipped around the asteroid at incredible speed and shot toward the finish line, like they had been fired from a cannon. When Deho crossed the final checkpoint, his timer read 9 minutes and 47 seconds. The previous course record had been 18 minutes and 32 seconds, held by a Nexari pilot for over 50 years. Deho had not just broken the record, he had cut it almost in half on Station Kepler. The main display screen showed the final results, and for several seconds, nobody spoke. The alien pilots stared at the numbers like they were looking at something that could not exist. The Administrator Vextal was the first to break the silence. His golden eyes were wide, and his long tail had stopped moving completely in 300 years of conducting this test, he said slowly. I've never seen anything like what just happened. The human did not just pass the test, he redefined what we thought was possible. The other pilots began talking all at once, their voices mixing. In dozens of languages. How did he fly through the debris field without instruments? His solar wind surfing technique should not work in a vacuum. Nobody has ever read silicate emotional patterns before. He solved the moral choice by proving it was based on false information. Yell Ra, the Zephyrian female, floated closer to the display screen, her forearms moving in amazed patterns. Captain Lee did not try to fly like other species. She said he flew like a human, and somehow that made him better than all of us. Kextar, the young Nexari, was shaking his head with all four eyes blinking rapidly. This changes everything we thought we knew about pilot training. If human techniques can produce results like this, then maybe other species have been approaching flight training incorrectly. Administrator Vextal activated the station-wide communication system to make an announcement. All pilots, please report to the main hangar bay. Captain Lee Deho will be arriving shortly, and I believe we all have much to learn from what he has accomplished today. The alien pilots began moving toward the hangar bay. There was a new respect in their voices when they talked about the human pilot. The mockery and pity from earlier were gone, replaced by curiosity and admiration. But the most important change was in Administrator Vextal himself. His golden eyes held a look that had not been there before. A look that suggested the Federation flight test might never be the same again. The human had not just passed the test, he had shown that there were better ways to fly than anyone had ever imagined. When Deho's ship touched down in the main hangar bay of Station Kepler, the entire area fell silent. Hundreds of alien pilots, mechanics, and station workers had gathered to see the human, who had just accomplished the impossible. The landing was perfect, smooth and controlled, just like everything else he had done during the test. The cockpit opened and Deho climbed out. He looked exactly the same as when he had entered the ship hours earlier. His flight suit was not even wrinkled, and his face showed no signs of the stress that should have come from flying the most dangerous course in the galaxy. He simply looked tired, like someone who had finished a long day of work there. A crowd of aliens stared at him in complete silence. Some of them had never seen a human up close before and were surprised by how small and ordinary he looked compared to their own species. The Gorviks towered over him with their massive four-armed bodies. The Altarians seemed to glow with inner light that made their blue, crystalline skin beautiful and strange. The Zephyrians floated gracefully above the ground, with their silver hair moving like water. But this small, ordinary human had just done something none of them had ever accomplished. Vextal approached with his long reptilian strides and golden eyes that seemed to see everything at once. He stopped directly in front of Deho and looked down at him with an expression that was hard to read. Captain Lee, Deho, he said, in his deep voice that carried easily through the silent hangar. In 300 years of conducting the Federation flight test, I have never witnessed a performance like yours. Your final time of 9 minutes and 47 seconds has broken the previous record by more than 8 minutes. The alien crowd began to murmur among themselves, but Vextal raised one scaled hand for silence. More importantly, he continued, you have shown us flight techniques that we did not know were possible. Your approach to the debris field, the solar wind corridor, the gravity wells, and the empathy maze were unlike anything in our databases. How did you accomplish these maneuvers? Deho reached into his flight suit pocket and pulled out the photograph of his daughter. Eugenie, he looked at it for a moment before answering. Jai had to, he said, simply, my people have a saying that necessity is the mother of invention. When you only get one chance, you find ways to make it count. But your techniques violate several principles of advanced flight theory, said Kextar, the young Nexori pilot, who had pushed through the crowd to get closer. You turned off your navigation systems and flew by instinct alone. This should have resulted in immediate collision with the debris field. Deho smiled slightly. Other species try to calculate the perfect path through obstacles. But humans learn by doing. We adapt to situations as they change, instead of trying to predict everything in advance. Gorvik warrior named Grumtak stepped forward. His 4 massive arms crossed over his chest, But how did you read the emotional signals of species you had never encountered before? The silicate beings communicate in ways that even our best xenopsychologists cannot interpret. Humans have spent thousands of years learning to understand different cultures on our own planet, Deho explained. We had to learn to read the emotions of people who looked different, spoke different languages, and thought in different ways. When you grow up in a world with hundreds of different groups, you learn to see patterns that others miss. The Zephyrian female floated closer, her large black eyes showing curiosity and respect. But what about the final section? You solved the moral choice test. By proving that the choice itself was false, how did you know to question the scenario? Because humans are naturally suspicious, Deho said with a slight smile. We question everything, especially when something seems too simple or too obvious. The moral choice test was designed to see if pilots would help enemies even at personal cost, but I noticed that the enemy signals were wrong, so I investigated further. Administrator Vextal Golden Eyes were studying Deho with intense interest. Your species approaches problems in ways that are completely different from established Federation methods. Yet your results prove that these approaches are not just effective, but superior to our current techniques. The administrator paused and looked around at the crowd of alien pilots who were hanging on every word. This raises important questions about our training methods and our understanding of what makes a good pilot. Captain Lee, your success suggests that we may have been teaching flight techniques incorrectly for centuries. A Malexian engineer with soft purple fur and nervous twitching ears spoke up in her quiet voice. Does this mean that human pilots are naturally better than other species? No, Deho said firmly, shaking his head. Humans are not better, we are just different. Every species has strengths and weaknesses. The Federation has been trying to make all pilots fly the same way, but maybe the best approach is to let each species develop their own techniques based on their natural abilities. An Altarian female with particularly bright blue crystalline skin stepped forward. Can you teach us these human techniques? Captain Lee, some of them, probably, Deho replied. But you would also need to teach me Altarian mathematical precision and Gorvic combat maneuvers and Zephyrian grace. The best pilots of the future might be those who can combine techniques from multiple species. As the crowd of aliens began talking excitedly among themselves, translating Deho words into their own languages and discussing the implications. His success had not just proven that humans could pass the test, it had suggested that the entire Federation approach to pilot training might need to change. Administrator Vextal raised his hand for silence again, and when he spoke, his voice carried a weight that made everyone listen carefully. Captain Lee, Deho, you have accomplished something that no pilot in Federation history has ever done. You have not just passed our test, you have shown us that our test was incomplete. You have revealed techniques and approaches that we never knew existed. The administrator paused and his golden eyes seemed to glow brighter. Therefore, I am recommending to the Federation Council that you be offered not just admission to the Academy, but a position as an instructor. Your methods need to be studied and shared with pilots from all species. The alien crowd erupted in surprised voices. Some were excited by the idea of learning new techniques. Others seemed concerned about changing traditions that had worked for centuries, but all of them were talking about the small human who had changed everything. Deho looked around at all the alien faces staring at him and felt a weight lifting from his shoulders. He had done what he came to do. He had proven that humans deserved a place among the stars. He had kept his promise to Eugen, but more than that, he had discovered something important about the nature of excellence. Sometimes the best way to succeed was not to follow the rules perfectly, but to find new rules that worked better. As the crowd began to disperse and the alien pilots headed back to their quarters to prepare for their own test attempts, Deho remained in the hangar bay, looking out through the massive windows at the stars beyond. Tomorrow, he would begin the process of joining the Federation Academy, of teaching other pilots, and of helping humanity take its place in the galactic community. But tonight, he just wanted to stand there and look at the stars that were no longer impossible to reach. The photograph of Eugen was still in his hand, and he whispered to it softly, "We did it, little one. We finally did it." Behind him, Administrator Vextal was making communication calls to the Federation Council, explaining what had happened and recommending major changes to the flight test program. The human pilot had not just passed the test, he had proven that there were better ways to fly than anyone had ever imagined. In the galaxy would never be the same. The Great Hall was enormous, with curved walls that reached up toward a domed ceiling. Covered in stars, each species had their own section with seats. designed for their particular body types and environmental needs. Debate had been going on for weeks. Some council members argued that Deho's success was just a lucky accident, that others pointed out that his innovations had revealed serious flaws in the Federation training system that needed to be addressed immediately. Elder Mordun, of the Ancient Ones, was the oldest member of the council. His species had been exploring space for over 10,000 years, and their wisdom was respected by all other races. He rarely spoke during debates, but when he did, everyone listened to the discussion. Today focused on a proposal that would change Federation policy forever. Instead of giving multiple attempts to test candidates, all species would now receive only one chance at the flight test, just like humans had always been given. Counselor Vex Kara, an Altarian with brilliant blue crystalline skin, stood to address the assembly. Her mathematical mind had been analyzing the data from Deho test results for months. "The evidence is clear," she announced in her crystal chime voice. "When species receive multiple attempts at our test, they approach it with less intensity and focus. They know they have backup chances, so they do not push themselves to find truly innovative solutions. Captain Lee's success proves that limitation can actually enhance performance." A massive Gorvik warrior named Thul Manak rose from his seat, all four arms crossed over his chest. "This proposal dishonors our traditions," he rumbled in a voice like thunder. "The Gorvik way has always been to fight until victory is achieved. Multiple attempts show determination and courage, but does it show excellence?" asked a Zephyrian diplomat named Sulyath. As she floated gracefully above her seat, the human pilot achieved something none of us thought possible. Precisely. Nixari's species activated his holographic display to show comparative data before the human test. "We believed our training methods were optimal. Our pilots achieved consistent results and steady improvement over multiple attempts." The display showed charts and graphs that filled the air above the council floor. "But Captain Lee, results suggest that our consistent results were actually limitations," he continued. "His single attempt produced innovation, breakthrough thinking, and performance levels that surpassed centuries of gradual improvement." Why? Because he could not afford to fail. The debate continued for hours, with representatives from dozens of species arguing about tradition versus innovation, safety versus performance, proven methods versus untested approaches. Finally, Elder Mordun stood up slowly, his ancient form commanding immediate silence from the entire assembly. "His 10,000 years," he began, in a voice that was quiet but carried to every corner of the great hall. "My people have watched younger species join the Federation. We have seen them struggle with our tests, adapt to our methods, and eventually become part of our community." He paused and looked around at all the different alien faces. Listening to him, we always believed that forgotten. The elder moved slowly to the center of the chamber, where his words would reach everyone equally. "Some they find reserves of creativity, courage, and determination that they never knew they possessed." Elder Mordun activated his own holographic display showing the history of Federation flight tests over the past 3 centuries. "Look at these results," he said, pointing to the data. "Every species shows the same pattern. Their first attempts are cautious and methodical. Their second attempts are slightly more confident. Their third attempts often succeed, but rarely exceed expectations." The display changed to show Deho record-breaking performance, but when forced to succeed on the first try, this human achieved something none of us had imagined possible. He did not just pass our test, he revolutionized our understanding of what excellent piloting could be. The elder looked directly at each species delegation as he continued. "I propose that we adopt the human model." Vex Kara stood again, her crystalline skin pulsing with thoughtful blue light. "But Elder Mordun, what if this change results in more failures? What if species cannot adapt to the increased pressure? Then they will find new ways to prepare, new methods of training, and new levels of excellence." The elder replied. "The human did not succeed despite having only one chance. He succeeded because of it. The voting process took several more hours as each species delegation consulted among themselves and debated the implications. Some worried about increased pressure on their young pilots. Others were excited about the possibility of breakthrough innovation. The final vote was counted. The result was closer than anyone had expected, but it was decisive. The Federation would implement the new rule within 1 year. All species would receive exactly 1 attempt at the flight test. 6 months later, Captain Lee Deho stood in the instructor briefing room at the Federation Academy. Looking out at his first class of students, the room contained young pilots from 12 different species, all of whom had volunteered to learn human flight techniques. The students included Yolra, the Zephyrian female, who had been kind to him during his test, Kextar, the young Nexari, who had explained why humans always failed, and even "We begin something new," Deho told his mixed species class. "You are here not just to learn how to fly, but to discover your own unique approaches to the challenges of spaceflight. Is my daughter, she died because human technology was not advanced enough to keep our people safe. I came here to earn humanity a place in the stars, so that no other parent would lose a child the way I lost mine." The alien students listened with respectful attention as Deho continued, "But I learned something during my test. I did not succeed by trying to fly like other species. I succeeded by flying like a human, by using the strengths that came from my own background and culture." He looked around at all the different alien faces in his classroom. "Your assignment is not to copy human techniques, but to discover what makes your own species special. Find the advantages that come from your unique evolution, your cultural values, and your natural abilities. Then find ways to use those advantages that no one has tried before." Young Altarian student raised her hand with crystalline fingers that sparkled in the light. "Instructor Lee, the Federation test now gives everyone only one attempt, just like humans always had." "Does this mean all species are now equal?" Deho smiled. "No, it means all species now have the same opportunity to discover what they can achieve when everything depends on succeeding the first time." As the months passed, the new rule began to show results. The quality of pilots entering the Federation Academy improved dramatically as species developed better training methods and more innovative approaches to flight. Some species discovered that their traditional techniques had been holding them back. Others found new ways to combine their natural abilities with advanced technology. The overall result was a new generation of pilots who were more creative, more determined, and more capable than any who had come before. Years later, when young pilot candidates asked Instructor Lee why humans only got one shot at the test, he would smile and tell them the truth. "We did not get one shot because we were considered weak or inferior. We got one shot because that was all we needed. When you know you cannot fail, you find ways to succeed that you never knew existed." The photograph of Eugene remained on his desk throughout his teaching career, a reminder that sometimes the greatest achievements come from the deepest losses, and that humanity's greatest strength was not in their technology or their numbers, but in their refusal to give up when everything depended on it. It was about bringing everything you had to that one moment when success was the only acceptable outcome. In teaching that lesson to the galaxy, humans had finally found their place among the stars.